Welcome to The Homeless Conservative, a show about principled politics for exhausted citizens. I'm your host, Blake Fisher, and I'm a political junkie so that you don't necessarily have to be, but what a week to be a political junkie if you're going to be one. We had the debate last week. I talked about that, and I wanted to do something for July 4th. Happy 4th of July. Happy birthday, America. 248 years old. And, you know, with this upcoming election, it seems that both sides are saying that this might be the last birthday America has, right? MAGA people, Biden's people, both are saying if you elect the other guy, it'll be the end of American democracy. I have trouble believing that, not buying that. I do think both these people are threats to democracy. I think they're both bad presidents. I think they've both proven to be that. I think that they would be worse in their second terms, both of them. I think some legitimate concerns from both sides, for example, would be, I think it's a legitimate concern that people say, hey, you know what? Trump might not respect the rule of law, especially with the Supreme Court ruling this week that says essentially presidents are immune from prosecution of things that relate to their official duties. I'm going to do a whole episode sometime in the near future with an actual lawyer, and we'll talk about all these Supreme Court decisions, maybe next week. But know that the headlines that say Trump has absolute immunity, that's not true. That's not what the Supreme Court said. But they did say he can't be prosecuted for official acts. I think this makes some sense, actually, because think of all the official acts. Like, can we prosecute Barack Obama for killing an American citizen with a drone strike? That's an official act. He killed an American citizen knowingly. Can we prosecute him for that? I think the Supreme Court probably got this right. Could we retroactively prosecute FDR for interning Japanese people during World War II? It's an official act. It's definitely wrong. I think illegal. This is tricky because sometimes presidents do things that in the moment seem like the right thing and they're not. I think it's the right decision. But the point is, everyone's blowing this into a thing that people are already saying that Trump's going to be the end of democracy. But this is now like aggressively adding fuel to the fire. And I don't like Donald Trump at all. I think he's very dangerous. I think reelecting him would be foolish. I think nominating him, I think Republicans that nominated him are foolish and will live to regret that decision, I believe, because I think that Donald Trump doesn't have any loyalty to any person or any cause, any policy. His loyalty only to himself. Biden's similar. I think the calls that Biden is a threat to democracy are not illegitimate in the sense that every time Biden signs an executive order that he knows is illegal and he says as much, but he's going to do it because Congress won't do anything, that's unconstitutional. And that's acting like a dictator. That my pen says, you know, what I say goes because I'm going to sign this thing that says we're going to forgive student loans. Even though the Constitution and Congress have not given him that power. That's unconstitutional. It bothers me when people talk about Trump's unconstitutional behavior without mentioning Biden's. They both act unconstitutionally. But here's the good news, and this is the thing I wanted to do on this podcast episode, is to say it will not be the end of democracy. We have had worse presidents. If you watched the debate last week, over and over again, both of them accused each other of being the worst president ever. It's just simply not true by any measure of that standard. You could look at the things that happened during each one of their administrations, and some of them were very, very bad. I think Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan was atrocious and absolutely had lasting consequences that we're seeing right now in the world. I think that we're seeing Russia invade Ukraine. I don't know if that happens if we don't have such a disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan and Biden show his hand that he has no interest in doing anything other than trying to avoid conflict of any kind, which is just not the job of the president. There is going to be conflict sometimes, and you're going to have to do sometimes an unpopular thing or sometimes the hard thing, and we're just not doing it. So I think Biden's Afghanistan withdrawal was very bad for geopolitical conflicts throughout the world because I think that it enabled, I think it sort of gave some confidence to people like Putin, Xi Jinping in China, Iran's leadership, North Korea. I think some of these people stepped up and said, we might be able to get away with more as Biden is the president. I think Trump's claims of nothing happening while he was president, not that nothing happened, that's a little bit ridiculous, but it's not completely ridiculous to say. I think Trump was a little bit of a wild card. That can be a bad thing too. My point is, both of these people, I think that when you look at what the right is saying about Biden, they're saying he's too old. And I think that people like me have been saying this for a long time, and I'm not saying I'm unique in this. People on the right have been saying Biden is too old to even maybe finish this term. And I think we saw that on the debate last week. I think we saw that he's too old to continue to be the president. I don't think it's outrageous to say he should not run for a second term, but he should also not finish out this term. I'm not confident he can be the president for the next 6 months. He's working a schedule from 10 to 4 every day, basically at tops. Rarely does interviews, rarely does public appearances, almost always has a teleprompter, has notes, is increasingly relying on other people to help him out. And Democrats are going to say, well, you're electing an administration. No, we're not. We elected a single guy, Joe Biden, to be the president of the United States. We also elected Kamala Harris as the vice president, so that in case he can't do the job anymore, he's incapacitated, he dies, we have someone that we know will be in charge. We have to have a single person in charge. And I think Democrats and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and the cabinet are playing very dangerous games by just hoping nothing terrible happens in the next 6 months where they would potentially have to invoke the 25th Amendment. What if Russia does something truly crazy, attacks another country? What if Taiwan is invaded by China? What if the conflict in Israel spreads throughout the Middle East? Because it is going to. Lebanon, the Hezbollah in Lebanon is attacking Israel from the north. That's becoming a second front in the war. The Gaza thing is going to be potentially not the thing we're even talking about involving Israel in the near future. And, what's going to happen if the president has to make a decision at 2 a.m. and he can't because, I don't think it's unrealistic to say, working a schedule from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. sounds kind of like sundowners, what a lot of old people get, where they get more confused at night. They're better during the day than they are at night. So this is a real problem, and I think it's a real threat to democracy in a way that has nothing to do with his policies, just his ability to do the job even at all. So I think there's a legitimate case on the right to say we cannot elect that guy to be president again, and we're not even sure he can get through the next 6 months. I think that's totally legitimate. I also think it's totally legitimate on the right to say his policies have been disastrous. Biden's spending has caused inflation, no doubt. So did Trump's spending, but Biden's caused more because Biden's was more unnecessary than Trump's spending. Trump's COVID spending, happened during the actual pandemic in 2020. Biden's spending came after we were largely out of it. We had a vaccine. We were mostly back to work. We didn't need to spend that extra money to be more inflationary. So he caused a lot of that. I think, when you're talking about the end of democracy, potentially, I think there's less reasons to say that Biden's going to usher that in. But his policies are very bad. This executive order doing everything by executive order is bad for democracy. That's not how the Constitution set up our government. It set up our government for Congress to make laws and for the executive branch to enforce those laws. And the president can obviously sign laws or veto laws. He has that power. That's his check on Congress. But it's not his job to supersede Congress when they don't do something that does not give the president the ability to act on his own. And both these guys do that all the time, to a degree that no president has done more of. Don't quote me on that for sure, but I'm pretty sure both these have signed more executive orders. Basically, every president signs more executive orders than the previous president. I believe that's correct. I might check myself in a second, but this is bad, right? This is not good. It's not the way democracy is supposed to work, because you want to talk about democracy. We didn't elect Joe Biden to sign executive orders and change the law. We elected him to be the head of the executive branch and enforce the laws, but not to interpret them, not to make them. And so I think that's a legitimate threat to democracy, because it's not democracy. Democracy is what we're supposed to be doing when we elect our congresspeople, and they create the laws, okay? I think Trump, obviously, from the left, has a lot of anti-democratic behavior. You've got this whole, sort of Project 2025 thing that's very nationalist, very authoritarian. I don't like any of it. I think it absolutely is a threat to democracy. I think that there's a lot in it that is not American. Like, quite frankly, it's not how, again, not how our government is supposed to be. Trump doesn't want to get rid of the bureaucracy. He wants to take over the bureaucracy. So you hear, and this is in the plans. I mean, this is like public stuff. This is not conspiracy theory nonsense. This is what the plans are that people like Heritage Foundation are putting forward, is sort of litmus test of loyalty test to Donald Trump. That's the test. It's on the application for government jobs right now in the administration. They're already trying to flesh this out so they don't have to play a bunch of catch up. They want to hit the ground running in January of 2025 if they get reelected, which at this point is going to happen, by the way. Trump's going to get reelected. So I think there are legitimate threats that both these people would be dangerous presidents that wouldn't work within the scope of their constitutional powers that were given to them. They want to work outside of those powers, both of them. Joe Biden wants to do it via executive orders. Trump wants to do it via executive orders. They both want to do it via the bureaucracy. They're unelected. They don't want to get rid of the bureaucracy. They just want to have their people inside the bureaucracy. And I think that's bad. But I thought it would be worth giving you some examples of why it will not be the end of democracy. Because believe it or not, we have had terrible presidents before. I know you watch that debate and you hear them talk about, oh, Joe Biden's the worst president ever or Donald Trump's the worst president ever. They're really not. Neither one of them are the worst presidents ever. They've been very bad presidents, in my opinion. Some people think Biden is a pretty good president. I disagree with almost all of the policies he's enacted. So while, yes, maybe he's done the job in some ways, okay, I disagree with his policies. And Trump was a similar mixed bag. It's like some of his administration did good things. Sometimes they did bad things. This is normally how it works. But there have been some presidents that pretty much exclusively did bad things. Okay? So let's just talk about a few of them just so that you can, sounds like weird, to be optimistic about where America is going to be in 2028 after whether Donald Trump gets elected, Joe Biden gets elected, Kamala Harris becomes president because he is incapacitated or dies. None of these people are going to be great presidents. But we've had a lot of bad presidents before, and I think the country will continue to be a country in 2028. Okay? I think we're going to make it to America's 250th birthday in 2026 even. I don't think that we're not going to get to celebrate that because the Constitution is shredded. Although Democrats would love to shred the Constitution. They don't have any fealty to the Constitution whatsoever. And to pretend that they do, they want to change the First Amendment to say that hate speech isn't allowed. They want to change the Second Amendment to say that you can't have guns. They want to change the Fourth Amendment, frankly, too. So does the right. We don't talk about the Fourth Amendment much, but not a lot of respect for the Fourth Amendment on either side right now, in my opinion. So don't pretend Trump is some constitutional defender. Don't pretend Biden is. Neither one of them are, but we've also had a lot of other presidents that were bad at it too. So let's just go through a few highlights of presidents that behaved badly. Andrew Jackson, kind of a famous president for, some of the bad things he did with Native Americans and et cetera. But keep in mind, he also killed a guy in a duel, which to me, it's crazy that we ever had duels, but seems like a very man thing to do, obviously. Like, let's just go out in the street and shoot each other. And that's how we'll settle our differences. It's a weird way of doing things, but it is weird that Trump often talks about, and we then talk about that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and his supporters would still support him. And I think he's absolutely right about that. And, but none of Trump's criminal things rise to the level of that he killed a guy. And I think it's worth noting why, obviously, duels were more common back then, and we think that there was these, huge problems that they had with each other. The duel, in the case of Andrew Jackson, was based on a bet on a horse race. And there were these public letters that the other guy published. saying some things about Andrew Jackson that he like wasn't on the up and up on this bet on a horse race that Andrew Jackson owned a horse and was going against this other guy's horse, and the guy had to pull out of the race because his horse was sick, so he forfeited the race, and then there was a disagreement about what the bet was if someone forfeited, and so they dueled, and he killed a guy, and then we elected him as president. So, there's that. We've had actual murderers. I count it as murder, even if a duel was legal back then. It's weird, but you still murdered a guy. In the biblical sense, you killed a guy, okay? That's pretty bad, right? We've had a lot of alcoholic presidents. Ulysses S. Grant was often seen vomiting from his drunkenness. That seems like a problem. Grover Cleveland, oddly enough, the only other guy that's actually won 2 terms, non-sequential. Couldn't think of that word, sorry. He was a drunk. Martin Van Buren was a drunk. Franklin Pierce was also a drunk. Pierce died of liver failure. He literally left the presidency. He's like, all right, there's nothing else to do but drink now. And he just drank himself to death, okay? I think having a drunk in the White House is kind of like having Biden in the White House right now. I think that there's probably a similar level of ability to do the job. And we survived with those people as presidents, even though they were drunk most of the time. Let's talk about Lyndon B. Johnson. He was an absolute... Look, if you think Trump is a bad human being, I think if we had to actually compare stats, if we had baseball card style thing we could look at on Trump's bad behavior and LBJ's bad behavior, I think LBJ would win as the bigger a-hole. Allegedly, to me, the thing that tops it is that he peed on a Secret Service agent. It was just kind of like, yeah, I can do what I want. He apparently just whipped it out in front of people all the time and peed, would do interviews in the bathroom and all sorts of weird stuff. He was absolutely racist. He used the N-word all the time, even in the White House recordings, because he had kind of set up the Oval Office to record stuff all the time. So even though he gets credit for advancing the civil rights stuff in the 1960s after the death of Kennedy, he's pretty racist. Don't like the guy. So there's all these people that were bad people. I think that there's one specifically that wasn't just a bad person, because I do think that Biden and Trump are both bad people. If they weren't bad people, as I said last week on the show, they would not be running for president again. They'd put their country or their party or any number of other things above their own ego and pride, and they won't do it. So I think they're bad people. I don't think that they are good human beings because of that. I don't think they're good presidents. I don't think they're good leaders. But man, Woodrow Wilson comes to mind as someone that's not only bad in character, but actually bad in policy too. And in a lot of the ways, these policies are things that we're still living with today. So, most of these terrible presidents I talked about, especially in 18, I think the stat is that from 1826 to 1931, I think that's the years. So it's about a century. Basically, no Democrat was reelected when they were basically one-term presidents. Grover Cleveland sort of being an exception because he ran after he got defeated and did win again. But so Woodrow Wilson's kind of the first Democrat in that swing of time, because remember the Republican Party is founded in basically it's a split in the late 1850s to 1860s, and we get Lincoln and obviously the Civil War and the freeing of the slaves, and Republicans kind of dominate for the next while. But Woodrow Wilson gets 2 terms, and I think that it's funny that we didn't learn about this a lot. I don't remember learning about Woodrow Wilson a lot in school. I feel like we skipped straight to FDR in the World War II stuff. FDR's entire kind of premise of government comes from Woodrow Wilson. He served in Woodrow Wilson's cabinet, and so is his administration. And so, what I don't like about Woodrow Wilson is he expanded the role of the national government. He was anti-constitution. He was a true, he grew up in the South during segregation. He was like a segregationist. He segregated the federal government. by the way, in situations where black employees couldn't be segregated logistically, like let's say you had a secretary that was black and worked for a white department head or something like that. In that situation, if they couldn't be segregated, because obviously they had to work with each other if you're the secretary for the guy, well, they would literally put them in a cage. They'd build a cage around the black employees so they couldn't, I don't know, access the white people or something. This was under Woodrow Wilson's administration. And when people look back and they go, well, a lot of people were racist back then. No, even by standards of the time, he was more racist than other people. He was the president of Princeton. And while he was at the head of Princeton, he basically, obviously segregated Princeton. He actively discouraged minorities from being at Princeton, calling them not Princeton material and stuff. And this was not happening at the other Ivy League schools. They were actually integrating blacks into their schools, and he was continuing to double down on the segregation. So that's why he's president of Princeton. And, he screened Birth of a Nation, which is a KKK film, at the White House. He made interracial marriage a felony in D.C. So these are not just, you're a bad person, I think, if you're racist. He's also enacting policies because he has power that are racist and continue for decades after that. As governor of New Jersey, he signed a law to forcibly sterilize people that he claimed were hopelessly defective or criminal classes. That's what the quote was, sorry. So he's for sterilizing essentially minorities, poor people. Criminal class is basically just like it is now, sometimes a sort of a dog whistle for black people. So these were his policies. He thought that, we should be able to force people to be sterilized so they couldn't have kids. Eugenics was popular with a lot of people back then, but he's the one actually enacting policies to say you can do this as governor, as president. One thing I did not know, I was kind of researching this earlier. He had a Senate ally, Ben Tillman. This is one of his biggest allies in the Senate, who was famously super pro-lynching. And this is in the early 1900s. This isn't in the 1800s. This isn't in the South. This is in D.C., a sitting United States senator, pro-lynching. He also loved to be gun grabbing. This is kind of the Second Amendment, be darned. But he specifically loved to take guns from black citizens. That's specifically who Ben Tillman liked to go after, was we're going to take the guns from black people so that they can't defend themselves from white people. That's my other biggest problem with the left's issues with the Second Amendment, is that what most people don't understand is that most gun laws were passed to prevent black people from having guns. That's the truth. Almost every gun control law had some sort of racist backstory to it. Even the ones that we think are good, like, for example, the assault weapons bans or open carrying bans. That was Ronald Reagan as governor in California as a reaction to the Black Panthers walking around with rifles. That's what the reaction was. I'm not saying Ronald Reagan was a racist, but I'm saying that policy that was signed into law was a reaction to black people carrying guns in public. And that's why open carry was outlawed in California. Now, yeah, they outlawed it across the board. They didn't just say black people couldn't carry guns, but it was still in reaction to black people carrying guns. That's what made people scared. That's what a lot of people on the left don't understand, right? So, this starts with a lot of his stuff, right? He jailed his critics. This is Woodrow Wilson. He jailed critics in the press. Talk about First Amendment violations. We talk about Trump's anti-press stuff. And it's absolutely true. I don't like the way he talks about the press. I think it's beneath the office of the presidency. But to my knowledge, Donald Trump never made anything with the press illegal. In fact, I think that we probably have more First Amendment rights now than we have ever in this country. Supreme Court continually, over and over again, keeps siding with people on First Amendment, free speech issues, okay, and not the government. One exception to that maybe being this last week's ruling about, specifically, did the Biden administration pressure social media companies and to label stuff as misinformation, disinformation, things like that, and take stuff down. So, jailing your critics, He banned magazines critical of policies from being distributed via the U.S. Postal Service. So if you had a magazine and you were anti-Wilson, you got banned from being able to be distributed. So you couldn't get that magazine out. So talk about the levers of government actually preventing the freedom of the press. That's a huge problem. This isn't so much a thing that I think is evil, but he signed the Jones Act, which is still a thing that we're dealing with economically 100 years later. It's coming, like the Jones Act, in case you are not aware, and a nerd like me, is a law that says every ship, if it goes from a U.S. port to a U.S. port, has to be built in the United States, has to be flagged U.S., which means it has to be built and basically certified in the United States, which means no other country's ships can take stuff from one port in our country to another port. I've explained before how this causes natural gas prices to be like 6x in New England, what they are in Texas, because we can't ship the oil, we can't ship the liquefied natural gas from, say, Louisiana, where it's created. Not created, I mean, we're drilled for and then processed. And you can't just ship a ship up the coast to New England to do that unless it's a U.S.-built ship, and we don't really build those kind of ships. So that's just one specific example. New England has to then get their natural gas from places like Norway because, okay, well, if it's going to have to come from Norway, it's got to be a Norway ship. That's fine. You can do that. Now, to be fair to New England, this is also because they just refused to build a pipeline from Pennsylvania where there's also a lot of natural gas. So that's on them too. That's Democrats and their stupid anti-pipeline stuff. That's ridiculous too. But the ship stuff's real. You can't ship stuff from one port to another unless it's a U.S. flag shipped. And that causes all sorts of economic costs that we end up paying as consumers. So that's something that's just been around for a long time that I don't like, that he signed. But, protectionism has been a thing for a very long time. I don't like Trump's protectionist policies. His idea of doing a 10% tariff on all imported goods would be economically disastrous. It would cause prices to, you think prices have risen during the Biden administration. Wait till Trump does a 10% tariff across the board on everything just to protect some U.S. jobs, which, by the way, jobs will be lost in that process. It will not be a net gain of jobs for sure. He might protect it in a couple of industries, but we'll lose jobs. It will be bad economically. It's protectionist and it's foolish. But this goes back all the way back 100 years. Woodrow Wilson, we still have some of these protectionist policies. You may remember that we had a worldwide pandemic in 2020. You might remember also that 100 years earlier, there was the Spanish flu, a similar pandemic, killed a lot of people. We obviously didn't have medical technology to treat or prevent the spread of stuff, but even with the lack of technology, he still managed to screw up that pandemic. His Justice Department would threaten newspapers if they covered the Spanish flu. Because it's like kind of like, oh, we don't want people to know that a lot of people are dying. And so if we don't put it in the paper, no one will know. What a terrible idea, right? I mean, and because of that, there were all these huge gatherings of people that became super spreader events. Now, maybe they didn't understand that that was a super spreader event. Still, the point is, I don't like the president actually putting their thumb on the scale of what the press can and can't say. And Woodrow Wilson was maybe the worst offender of this. He also suffered a stroke in 1919, and his unelected wife essentially ran the presidency. So there's that too. So there's also this precedent for Joe Biden's behavior now. You know, we're not sure that he can run the presidency. Who knows who the hell is? So my point is that we've had really, really bad presidents before. And the country survived. The Constitution survived. Our system of government survived. Now, those presidents can do things that have absolutely lasting consequences. Like I said, Jones Act, still around. We still have some of these, sometimes one person does something, it excuses it for the next guy, and it continues. So I think that a lot of Democrats hate of the Constitution, or like they at least hate the limitations of the Constitution. Democrats tend to think that they could solve everything if they just put the right people in the bureaucracy. And if we just took control away from the stupid people, we could run this whole thing well. They can't. It's a pipe dream that they have. But a lot of this starts with Woodrow Wilson, the sort of like anti-Constitution stuff, the government being better at things than the private sector, trying to control the narrative. We're seeing the same thing happen right now. And even though the difference now is that Joe Biden doesn't have to force the press to take his side, they just do it automatically because there's so many Democrats at the top of the media too, that they carry his water all the time. Going back to last week's debate, just because I'm not tired of being angry about this yet, the press for a couple of years at least has been lying. I'm not going to call it gaslighting. I'm going to call it lying because that's what it is. They've been lying to us for a couple of years about Joe Biden's fitness for office. Everyone that said anything otherwise was labeled a lunatic or fearmonger or citing or ageist, or that they had no evidence to support such a thing. And all of a sudden, all at once, after a debate, they all decided at once, this is bad. And that was not just one bad performance. This is showing us who he really is. Well, you've been lying about this for years. The difference is Woodrow Wilson didn't have a press that was willing to do that, apparently. And so he had to force them to do so by like jailing the press, literally putting them in jail. Biden doesn't have to do that because the press carries his water for the most part. And you're starting to see that switch a little bit. You're starting to see people be like, well, he had a cold, or there was one bad debate performance. You're starting to see some of those Democrats, especially elected Democrats, make excuses for Joe Biden. The press, for the most part, went along with it for a long time and maybe has decided finally that they can't continue to go along with it because it's so obvious that they're lying, so they can't continue to lie. So this stuff continues, but we still are this country. Like, this country still exists. Woodrow Wilson didn't destroy the country. FDR didn't destroy the country. Richard Nixon didn't destroy the country. Gerald Ford didn't destroy. I mean, none of these people managed to destroy the country, okay? Donald Trump had, I think, a mixed bag of first term. He did some things I liked. He did a lot of things I really didn't like. I don't like his tariffs. I think they were bad. I don't like his general attitude. I don't like his demeanor. I don't like the way he talks about the press. I don't like a lot of stuff. I think he has authoritarian tendencies that I don't like. And he will not surround himself with adults that will tell him no in the second administration. If he's learned one lesson, it's that you don't hire people that are going to be good at the job. You hire sycophants now. That's what he's going to do. He's not going to have anyone to tell him that's illegal or that's a war crime. And he has those tendencies to want to do those things. So I do think he would be dangerous. But you know what? We got through his first term and we elected another guy. And we're still a country. He didn't destroy the country. He didn't end democracy, as so many people claimed would happen in 2016. I remember specifically the Pod Save America guys. I can't stand those guys because I will never take anything they say seriously because I watched them go on, I think it was Colbert. It was one of the late night shows. And say out loud in 2016 that this may be the last election you ever, I think it's 2016. It might have been 2020. Don't quote me on this. They basically said, this may be the very last election you ever get to vote in. That's fear-mongering BS. And they know it. There's been Donald Trump did not manage to cancel any elections. Now, he tried to steal an election in 2020. I think that was bad, but the institutions held up. I think that's an important part of the story of January 6th. I mean, everything from November to January 6th of 2021. Sorry, getting confused here. I think the most important thing to take away from that is that, A, Donald Trump should not be allowed to be the president again, but it looks like he will be because of Joe Biden's just absolutely crapping the bed at that debate. And the polls are already looking like Trump is going to win anyway. I think that's just going to solidify it. Things could change. We still got a few months until November. So I think that his actions post-November of 2020 to January 6th, and even after that, have been awful. I don't think that we should trust him with national secrets the way he treated classified documents and just had them strung about Mar-a-Lago. I also don't think we should trust Joe Biden, as he had documents from when he was vice president in his garage by his Camaro. Okay? Neither one of these guys actually take the job seriously enough, in my opinion. And I think they're both dangerous, but it's not the end of democracy. Like, whoever you vote for, vote your conscience when it comes to November. I cannot get myself to vote for either one of these guys right now, personally. I cannot see a situation right now that makes me vote for either one of them because I think we keep giving into this, the lesser of two evils thing, and I think it's crazy. Why do we keep doing this? Until we put our foots down and say, no, our feet down? Sorry. Until we put our collective feet down and say, no, we're not picking one of these guys just because we dislike the other guy more. I think we're going to continue to get this. But no matter what happens in November, I don't believe a second Trump term is the end of democracy. I do not believe that you won't get a chance to ever vote again in an election. I do not think that either one of these people are technically trying to ruin the country. I do think they have a lot of bad ideas that will be bad long-term, and I do think there will be long-term consequences from either one of these guys being the president again, just like there are going to be long-term consequences of either one of them being the president in the first place for even one term. But it will not be the end of democracy. We will live to see America's 250th birthday and 252nd. And I think we'll have elections in 2028, and we will have elections in 2032. And now, I think we can do serious damage, but these are the only two choices we have in front of us right now. And so you're going to have three choices in November, essentially. You can vote for one of the two of them, enthusiastically or not. That's up to you, obviously. You can hold your nose, whatever you want to do. You can vote for one of these two guys and hope for the best. Or you can leave it blank and not vote for either one of these guys. Vote for down ballot Republicans, Democrats, whoever you want to keep the guy in check. I mean, that's what I'm hoping for at this point, honestly, is that if Trump's going to win, I don't want him to have a Republican-controlled House and Senate because I just don't trust him, and I don't trust Republicans at this point. Republicans are all in on Donald Trumpism and MAGAism. They don't have conservative principles. They will abandon those the second Trump abandons them. Just like we used to be the party for free trade. We're not anymore because Trump said tariffs are good. And so now Republicans have to say tariffs are good. There will be consequences to whoever we nominate or whoever we vote for in November and gets elected president. But it will not be the end of democracy. And so that's my only, that's as optimistic as I can get right now for this July 4th week, is that America's not going to burn out because Donald Trump gets elected or because Joe Biden gets elected. Although it will be important for either one of them that we keep them in check and that we have a robust press that will call them out. Now, I think that some of that needs to be that the press needs to do a better job at calling out the people on their team. So Fox News needs to do a better job at calling out Republicans, specifically Donald Trump, when he does something that is wrong. And the New York Times needs to do a better job of calling out Joe Biden when he does something wrong. And quit doing this team sport stuff. We need a better press. We need a better bureaucracy. We need a better Congress. We need better presidents. But we don't have them right now. I think that's our fault as people in this country because almost all of those things I said we can demand. If we don't like the way the press covers stuff, we can stop reading them, stop subscribing, stop watching. They will react to monetary incentives. President, same thing. If we don't reward the behavior of the parties for nominating these two guys, both of whom I don't think are equipped to be the president again. I think they both had bad first terms, and I don't think we should trust them to be the president again. But you know what? The party said, well, here you go. Republicans voted for Donald Trump this time around. They gave him solid majorities, which he didn't even have in 2016 when he ran the first time. So they're going to have to live with that if he's a bad president or does things they don't like. And Joe Biden, similarly, this could have been a conversation we had 2 years ago. He could have stepped down. I'd blame mostly Joe Biden and his family and the people around him for telling him it's okay to run again. But we'll make it through. But we can vote not just with our vote in November. We can vote with our wallets. You can vote with by what you read, by what you pay attention to on TV. You do have a say in changing this. You can elect different Congress people. But if we keep playing this partisan game of just keep voting for my team because I hate the other team more. Right now, most people are voting. Most people are going to vote in November across down ballot too. They're going to vote for the person they're less threatened by. Most people that are Republicans because they hate Democrats and are so threatened by the Democrat agenda that they say, well, I'll vote for a Republican. And anyone with that R next to them is fine. They could be crooks. They can be liars. They can be anything as long as they don't have a D next to their name. And it's true the opposite way. There's a bunch of people voting for Democrats that are only voting for that Democrat because they hate Donald Trump so much or hate Republicans so much. And without that D next to their name, like that absolves all sins, the D next to their name. They can be racist. They can be terrible human beings. They can have terrible policy ideas. They can be crooks. Doesn't matter. We're allowing them to go into Congress because we'd rather have that guy with the D next to his name than someone with an R next to their name. That's got to stop with us, the voters. Until we change, we deserve what we're getting right now, in my opinion, because we, Republicans, nominated Donald Trump in 2024. Despite everything we'd seen in the past, we nominated a guy that might be dangerous and certainly has authoritarian tendencies. And I think, absolutely wants to destroy a lot about the Constitution. He doesn't like the Constitution. He doesn't know anything about the Constitution. He wants to do what he wants to do and wants no limitations. And he's said that as much. And I think there's some legitimate concern to say that, I don't love a Trump that thinks he's completely immune from everything as long as it's somehow funneled through an official act. Keep in mind, that doesn't mean he can't be impeached and removed. So there's still a check on the president. That Supreme Court ruling did not say he couldn't be impeached and removed. It's just that Congress doesn't have the guts to impeach and remove someone, especially from their own party. This is not Nixon Watergate situation where Republicans went to him and said, we are going to impeach and remove you. Allegedly they didn't tell him he needed to resign, but basically left the ball in his court. Look, this is what we're not telling you what to do, but we're telling you what we're going to do. And there is no one in Congress willing to do that against their own party right now. And that's a shame. So anyway, that's my sunny, optimistic note that the country will survive either one of these guys. So I hope you have a great 4th of July. I hope you're not listening to this on 4th of July. I hope you're blowing something up and having a barbecue instead. But maybe you're listening to this on your drive or drive back. I'm going to the lake. I'm going to blow some stuff up. Hopefully not my hand, and have a good time. So thanks for joining me. Hope you have a great 4th. I'll catch you next time.